Veo cómo mi alma tiembla y se paraliza cuando estoy en silencio, y desde ahí me desnudo frente a la más grande batalla de mi vida, en la que, por cierto, he perdido en tantas ocasiones. Cansada, he optado por abrazar la soledad, el dolor emocional, la resignación, el miedo inexplicable y la melancolía. Es momento para detenernos y contemplarnos internamente, permitiéndonos en libertad expresar, mirar y sentir el comportamiento de nuestras emociones, aceptando que algunos estamos profundamente rotos. A través de este podcast tenemos la oportunidad de juntos ensanchar la mente, el corazón y así que nunca más vuelva a su tamaño original, definido por el ego. Es hora de sacarnos la máscara y mostrar abiertamente el rostro. Soy Gabriela Brito y este es mi podcast Liberi, Viviendo en Libertad.
Welcome to Liberi. It is a pleasure to be with you again. Today we're going to talk about human trafficking. We are here with Rachel Hambley. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
Rachel studied in Denver, Colorado. She studied justice and sexual trafficking also, and human trafficking. She's going to talk about how was her experience working with these people, because she was the director of a home that work with people with domestic violence and sexual assault, also with children from the street. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much.
It is a pleasure to have you here. We were talking with Rachel, the reason why she studied this, and I would like to know, why did you study this career?
Absolutely. So when I was about 13 years old, I read a book by Francine Rivers, and it's called Redeeming Love. And it basically kind of talks about the story of Hosea in the Bible and essentially prostitution. And I just felt like the Lord put on my heart to discover why people end up in these situations, what causes them to be put in these situations. And I began to work with organizations that worked with kids on the street, worked with prostitutes. Mm-hmm. And as I was working with them, it was really evident that human trafficking was a part of the story for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so I went to seminary and I studied justice and missions, focusing on God's heart for justice, but specifically studying what are the causes of human trafficking, what are the solutions for human trafficking, and like what can we do to help those that are stuck in this world.
Yeah, we were talking before the interview with Rachel about human trafficking, the difference between human trafficking and sexual trafficking. Sexual trafficking is a part of human trafficking, but human trafficking is broad.
Yeah.
So I would like you to talk about it.
Yeah,
explain to
absolutely.
people.
Yeah. So, I think sexual trafficking gets a lot of the light because it's egregious and it's horrific for people. And another portion of human trafficking is labor trafficking. It's also a huge portion of human trafficking. So it looks many different ways in many different countries. In the U.S., what the prominent types are begging on the street, so trafficking people over to beg on the street. It could look like labor in the fields. It could look like promising a job if they come to America and then trapping them in a home to do house cleaning or taking care of children without pay. So it's another large portion of human trafficking. So you've got both the sexual and the labor, and sometimes you have both.
How do you see human trafficking in the U.S. and South America? What is the difference that you have seen in both?
I mean, it's hard because it's an underground system, right? Mm-hmm. So it's difficult to point out, and you do actually really have to study each place you are, because traffickers are, there's an organization in the U.S. called Polaris, and they basically study survivors. So they study how they got trapped into it, they study how they got out of it. And what they said is that in the U.S. in particular, there's 25 different methods for traffickers to trap people. And that's just the ones we know about. And so it can look very different, but some common themes are that they use vulnerabilities to promise either a better future or to promise, in the case of sex trafficking, love, to entice people into a lifestyle that they would not normally get into. And so in the U.S., you do have a lot of people trafficked from overseas into the U.S. In South America, a large portion of people who are sex trafficked in South America stay within their country. So it's not necessarily that people are taken out of the country and gone. They're just forced into sex work, or they're forced into doing things that they normally wouldn't want to do. What you see for labor in the U.S. is a lot of times immigrants. So they're vulnerable. They're coming, trying to find a different life.
Yes.
And they're forced into some sort of labor where they're not getting paid, or they're trapped, basically.
And the legal status plays an important role in this because they are scared about it.
Right, exactly. So the legal system, a lot of them are undocumented. So when they try to come over and find a different way of living, they get trapped easily.
Cemento Atenas. Surgimos con el propósito de fortalecer los cimientos de familias y ser aliado de las manos que estructuran ideales. Somos una industria primaria comprometida con el medio ambiente. Nuestras buenas prácticas nos han hecho una empresa referente en toda la región. Ofrecemos soluciones y aplicaciones para diferentes proyectos de construcción. Cemento Atenas. Ciencia aplicada a la construcción.
You were the director of this center where you work with people who have suffered domestic violence and child abuse. What is the relationship that there is with the human trafficking and domestic violence and violence in general?
In general, I think the key thing is talking about risk factors and vulnerabilities, right? And so this world of trafficking and domestic violence and labor trafficking, they're all very cyclical. So it's very easy to get into a cycle of, for instance, if you're a kid and you watch your parent go through domestic violence, your risk factor of being in an environment where you either go into a domestic violence relationship when you're older or get into another vulnerable situation increases significantly. And so a lot of the adults that I worked with had come from families where there was domestic violence or abuse. Then they got into relationships where some of them were trafficked or prostituted out. And then they ended up with a partner who was violent or harmful to them or their kids. And so a lot of them are coming out of those kinds of environments, and a lot of them end up being hooked on drugs because it's an easy way to control people and what they do. So if you hook them on drugs, then they're dependent on you. So our women would come out of these situations and they would be coming off of drugs, or they would be coming out of kind of those emotional issues that come with being in those types of relationships.
In child abuse, is there a lot of drugs? The question is because we have these kids on the streets that we see that they are on drugs and they are asking for money for drugs, not for food specifically.
Right.
That's what we can see here in Cuenca.
Yeah.
Specifically, I don't know in the U.S., but here is the case.
Yeah, so I worked a lot with like homeless groups and street kids, people running away from home. And I think it is easier, right? So when you don't have a safe place to go, when you don't have like an easy environment to be a part of, a home where you feel like you're a part of something. It's easy to kind of move out, run away. And then there's often a lot of emotional or mental triggers in that process. And so drugs is an easy coping mechanism, right?
Do they also suffer sexual abuse in the streets?
They can. I mean, I think the main thing is to talk about risk factors, right? I think it's very possible. A lot of times when you're coming out of a home that's not safe, or you've been in a situation where you watched domestic violence, or you yourself have been abused, there's a lot of vulnerability when you're out on the streets. There's a lot of opportunities for people to take advantage of you. There's a lot of opportunities for you to be introduced to drugs where you might not have been. Whether somebody's forcing you to take the drugs so they're dependent on you, or you're using them to help cope with everything that you've been through and seen, whether you've experienced sexual abuse. So again, I think the key is talking about like risk factors and vulnerabilities, and the risk factors and vulnerabilities on the street is significantly higher than, let's say, in a family or in a home where you're going to be safe from some of those things.
Yes.
En Plásticos Rival entendemos la necesidad del mercado. Es por eso que estamos comprometidos en llevar la mejor tubería para desagüe, agua caliente, electricidad y accesorios a todos los hogares. Nuestros tubos de plástico ofrecen grandes ventajas desde el punto de vista de diseño, fáciles de instalar y confiables para operar. Rival pone a disposición del país la más alta tecnología existente en la fabricación de tuberías plásticas y accesorios de altísima calidad. Rival está en tu hogar.
Now we're going to talk about solutions. How do we work with them? You had experience because you are the director. How do you work with those hearts that are...
Oh gosh, I mean, it's so hard. It's there's a lot of different ways, right? And so in our home in particular, I think some of the things that we tried to focus on was both the practical and the mental emotional piece. I think one of the things for us is like the ultimate is to say, obviously, like the Lord is what brings freedom and finding a relationship with him, but in a more practical sense, also providing things like counseling, a safe place. So like our women would come and live with us for up to 2 years where they could start to rebuild. They could start to learn how to cook for their family, learn how to be on time to a work, situation, just things that they didn't learn, because again, like talking about kids on the street, the things that they have to grow up much faster, but they don't necessarily grow up mentally and emotionally. They just have to grow up and so they don't learn some of the practical skills that are necessary to function and to take care of a family. And so a lot of our women spent time getting their education or learning how to do a trade where they could go and have a job and provide for their family. And so I think, providing a house is a huge thing for a lot of people. But even without providing a house, providing safe places for them to come, I think even with women, there were some organizations that we worked with for women who don't have a house necessarily, but they were able to go to those educational things, or they were able to go and learn a trade so they could start making money to get a house, or just things like that where
you buy them. It's a change of the mindset.
Right. And so it's looking at them as like, okay, what can I help you build? But it's also empowering them, right? A lot of it has to be them having the freedom to learn who they are now in a different situation. Because again, you're coming out of stress and trauma and just like really hard situations to, okay, now I'm safe and I can try to create like a different life. That's a really hard transition. And I think us outside of the situation, we don't do a very good job of coming alongside them and allowing it to take how long it takes for them to get there. We talk a lot about addiction in our house. We would talk a lot about addiction because it tends to be a pretty prevalent thing. People are hooked on drugs either at a young age or they do it because they don't want to feel all of the things that they've experienced. And so
do you see more predominant in the US than here, the use of drugs?
I think drugs is predominant everywhere in the world. I think it's like I said, I think it's an escape, right? It's also a really easy way to control people. So if I were to go to a kid on the street and give them a drug to try and they get hooked on it immediately, I now have control over you because I'm your supplier. I'm where you can get those drugs. So you need me now. And I can basically use you however I want to.
It's a way to control them.
Right. It's a way to control them. And so overcoming that addiction piece first is really important, but also remembering that being sober is only a small portion of what these people are going to have to go through. It's only the first step because the reason a lot of them aren't sober is because they have trauma or pain or experiences.
It's a way to escape
that they don't want to deal with.
Yes.
So once you take away the drugs or the alcohol, now you've got to figure out how to help them work through all of those painful things.
Definitely it's not, it's a hard process. It's not an easy process.
Not easy or quick. Like I think a lot of times we expect people like, I rescued you from this situation, now you're better.
No, it is a process.
It's a long process.
What do you recommend here of what you know, what you have seen on the streets in human trafficking? What do you recommend for Cuenca? What the people should do, the organizations, the politicians, and all those people that are around this topic, how they have to work about this?
Yeah, I think really good, really hard question to answer. I think you do have to take a kind of all over approach, right? So politicians, one of the big things and one of the hard things is that traffickers are really, really smart, right? They make money off of this. It's important to them. So politicians need to be smarter. They need to figure out ways in which they can create environments where people can be rescued and safe without penalizing them for the life that they had to be in. So for instance, in the United States, prostitution was criminalized.
Yes.
Well, the danger of that is that you then have women who are quote unquote being rescued, but then they're put in jail.
Yes.
And now they have a, like something from jail, and it's hard to get a job if you've been in jail. And so it makes it harder for them to recover. So creating a system in which they can be rescued and then kind of redeemed into society. I also think a huge portion of it is churches, like the need and the ability to create safe spaces for whether that's programs throughout the week, whether that's creating education programs for people who are on the streets, whether that's creating, just like an environment where they can come and do something differently. Also, I think it's hard because I don't know a ton about, I know there's been a movement in the United States, but I don't know a ton about the movement in South America, but mental health is a really huge portion of it. And so increasing the access to psychologists, increasing the access to counselors to be able to kind of meet those needs. But it's hard. I think we need more, right? We need more facilities. We need more people willing to do the long and hard work.
Yeah, definitely.
It's hard. It is
a work that has to be done in conjunctions with all the people around the community. Yes. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much for all the information, for your experience, for all you have done, and you will continue doing here in Cuenca.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Veo como mi alma tiembla y se paraliza cuando estoy en silencio, Y desde ahí, me desnudo frente a la más grande batalla de mi vida, en la que, por cierto, he perdido en tantas ocasiones. Cansada, he optado por abrazar la soledad, el dolor emocional, la resignación, el miedo inexplicable y la melancolía. Es momento para detenernos y contemplarnos internamente, permitiéndonos en libertad expresar, mirar y sentir el comportamiento de nuestras emociones, aceptando que algunos estamos profundamente rotos. A través de este podcast tenemos la oportunidad de juntos ensanchar la mente, el corazón y así que nunca más vuelva a su tamaño original, definido por el ego. Es hora de sacarnos la máscara y mostrar abiertamente el rostro. Soy Gabriela Brito y este es mi podcast Liberi, Viviendo en Libertad.